Coming today. We're actually, Maury and I are both really excited about this presentation. I personally don't know a whole lot about plant phenology or the science of seasonal change, so really looking forward to what Joe walks us through. As you might know, Christina, I can't recall if you were at our last webinar, but the alumni webinar series was created this year by Mari and I and the rest of the alumni team, just to continue to bring conservation education to our alumni community. And yeah, we're super excited about it. We're having 6 different presentations throughout this year, one every 2 months. And Joe is our Yellowstone Program Manager, which Mari is going to tell us more about him shortly. And he is our second presenter. So just to note it, this Zoom call is being recorded. There will be some interactive elements in this presentation, and we definitely encourage your participation, but you're welcome to engage as much or as little as you'd like. Um, you can ask questions or answer prompts throughout, either way, via mic or the chat, both work. The presentation will be around 45 minutes with a little extra time for any lingering questions at the end. And thank you so much for being here. All right, Joe, you can change the slide. Joe, I have a bio here. He is EPI's Yellowstone Program Manager. He's going to discuss the definitions, applications, implications of phenology as an area of biological study and participatory science. He's been working with EPI since 2024 to bring students of ecology to Yellowstone National Park. He focuses his teaching on deep observations of the natural world using tracking, nature, journaling, and participatory science projects as tools to engage students. In 2015, Joe began incorporating phenology into his lessons with the North Cascades Institute, and today he continues to weave observations of seasonal cycles into curriculum of EPI's Yellowstone program. So, Joe, take it away.
Thank you so much, Maria and Gabri. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time talking about one of my favorite subjects in the world, which is plant phenology, and also just the opportunity that studying plant phenology gives us as educators. So I'll start the slides. And the first thing I'll say is that I am not a scientist. So that doesn't absolve me from any accuracies or inaccuracies in this presentation. But I just want to say that my orientation to this work and to this material is much more about what can I learn about this topic as a learner and how can I bring this into an educational space. And so for that reason, I really do encourage this time that we have together to be interactive. If Mari, Gabri, either of you two have questions as we go forward, or anybody else in the audience, whoever's here, please do interrupt me with questions or observations or thoughts or connections, whatever it is. I very much want this to be a roundtable discussion much more than a lecture that you need to sit through. So please do. And then also at the end of the presentation, I have a little activity for all of us to work on, myself included. And all it requires is a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, something to write with. So if you have that, please have it ready, and that'll be at the end. So without further ado, let's get into it. And the first question is this big word, what is phenology? And the best definition that I found is from this author Schwartz, who writes that the phenology is the study of plant and animal life cycle events in relation to environmental drivers such as weather and climate. Oftentimes when I am describing my passion for phenology and observing phenology, I'll tell people that it's simply the study of seasonal change. So if you think about any life cycle events, they are all driven by the seasons to some degree, as well as other cycles. But in so many ways, seasons really drive life. And as we're going to discover in this presentation, that can have implications at a very small micro level and also at a very large macro level. So whether we're talking about continental climate stories or we're talking about a single individual plant. We can understand what we're seeing and what we're observing through the lens of phenology. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on plant phenology, and I'm actually going to focus us in on a couple different species, but really one plant, honestly, one individual plant. So that's kind of where we'll go with this. Um, and that'll be a service berry next to my office that I visit every single day. But to get there, we're going to go at least continent wide, if not globally. I mean, we can extrapolate a lot of the lessons that we know from the US to the global scale as well. Um, and I'll come back to this slide or this graphic, this map about the daily spring index leaf anomaly. But I will just take a minute to describe it right here. So this map is one of many data visualizations that is produced by my favorite organization that deals with phenology, which is the USA National Phenology Network, or usanpn.org. So we'll talk a bunch about NPN, the National Phenology Network, in this hour. They collect data nationwide and they create data visualization tools like this. So what this is showing us is today, April 20th, 2026, what is the anomaly that we're experiencing relative to 30-year average, basically, in the spring leaf out, right? So this is the emergence of leaves in a few different species. I think most of their indicator species are lilacs and dogwoods, largely because those plants are really easy to observe, and especially lilacs, they've been studied for generations across the country, and they grow everywhere in the country. So lilac is a great indicator species. And a lot of this data really relies on the leaf out of lilac trees across the country, which is kind of cool because a lot of people love lilacs and they smell really good too. So there's some good pieces to those plants. Um, but before we go there, I wanted to give you just a brief background about myself and what brings me into this work. And so that brings us to actually the Pacific dogwood. So these photographs are pictures I took of a Pacific dogwood um, in the North Cascades National Park. And so this goes back to about 2014 when I started my master's program through Western Washington University. And it was a residential program in North Cascades National Park. And so what that meant was that I got to study natural history and practice environmental education in an environmental learning center tucked up into one of the greatest national parks I think that we have. It's really under known and undervisited, but it's a wonderful place full of great diversity and holds a lot of the montane species as well as the maritime species that we find along the West Coast, all the way up to the Pacific or the Cascade Crest. And and so I really got turned on to this species. This is Cornus natale, Pacific dogwood, and it's I think a beautiful plant when it's in bloom, certainly, but even in its senescence and its dormancy. On the left here, you can see that's its winter bud, its flower bud that just hangs out all winter, looking like a piece of broccoli on the end of a branch. And I think that is just the coolest. Um, how's my screen share doing? Are you all seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah.
Great.
And Joe, Christina asked what national park you were talking about again.
Oh yeah, that's the North Cascades National Park. And yeah, and that's along Highway 20 in northern Washington. Highway 20 starts in Anacortes and then climbs up into the mountains from through the national park and then empties out into Winthrop, Washington, and keeps going from there. But it's a great little small ecosystem. Wonderful. Anyway, so in grad school, I had a work study position at that environmental learning center. and I was the phenology coordinator. And so we had a citizen science project where we organized ourselves to make observations of specific plants and submit those observations through photos and data sheets. And and I coordinated that whole effort and collected all the data and processed it and all this stuff. But really, what it gave me was an opportunity to key in to the fact that these plants have discrete and identifiable life stage events every single year. And it's a beautiful practice, I think, to watch that unfold and to see exactly the moment, the day when that little leaf comes out of the bud. You can see that on the left-hand side there. March 20th, 2016 was the day that the leaves started to emerge from the leaf buds of that particular dogwood. And I wouldn't make the claim that March 20th, 2016 was the day of leaf emergence for dogwoods everywhere, right? So you feel free to like chime in here or just think to yourself, but like what what would drive a difference in leaf emergence in this plant um, across its whole range, which we could say stretches from like northern British Columbia all the way down to Oregon and through the Cascades. So it's a pretty big range. So like there's going to be a difference. What drives that difference, do you think?
Climate change?
Well, we could just say climate, right? So like, and
Um,
this is like within a single year, the dogwood in Vancouver, BC, and the dogwood in Anacortes, Washington, are going to flower or leaf out at slightly different times, right? So climate is going to be one reason because the climates are going to be different in those two places subtly, right?
Yeah. And Christina also said temperature or moisture.
Yes, great. So those are the other two main drivers of spring emergence that we track are temperature and precipitation regimes. Absolutely. Um, what about the two plants that are right next to each other and they have different timing? Why would that be? Why would they leaf out at different times if they're pretty much right next to each other?
Hmm. Christina says genetic variation.
Could be genetic variation. Um, Also, we would think about, do you have something else?
Well, Christina said one is shadowing the other, and I was just gonna say like competing for resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, 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 cool. Yeah, totally. So one might be shading the other, or the other might just be in the shade of some other plant or tree. So one's getting more sunlight than the other one. One might be getting more water in its roots than the other one. One might be facing a different aspect than the other one. One reason that I chose this plant to study was that it had this great southern aspect that because it was right next to a parking lot, and so like it had all this cool sun exposure. It was facing south, and there was nothing blocking it because of this parking lot. And so it was one of the first plants anywhere in the spring to burst its buds and start showing leaves. So that was always really exciting. So yeah, all of those factors can go into the timing of spring emergence in an individual, but we can also track that across the country and generalize it as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Anyway, so that really keyed me into the study of phenology and the use of phenology as an educational tool. And I'll just say, how great is this? I got to journal about it in my own nature journal. But then I would bring groups of students out to do the same thing. And we would sit and we would observe phenophases. So the phenophase is the definable phase of that plant or animal life cycle event. And so on the left, we can see that we're seeing bud burst, leaf emergence, and on the right, we're seeing full flower. So those are both phenophases. And so I would, build curriculum around how we observe phenophases out there in the world. And I just love this quote from Thoreau. Also, early March, right? I don't know if you all have experience of feeling certain things in early March, but my own experience is I often have a lot of anxiety around trying to see it all in that time frame where everything is happening all of a sudden, and how exciting that is, but how kind of nerve-wracking it can be too. Um, so let's get into it. Just a brief outline of what we'll talk about. So at the continental scale, we can do a little overview of the science. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I just pull from different sources and try to make those connections. We've already talked a little bit about climate versus weather, climate being those longer scale and larger scale patterns, weather being what we feel when we go outside or open the window, whether it's raining or cloudy or windy or warm or whatever it might be. And then climate, yeah, again, being that larger scale pattern that stretches across years, decades, generations, and continents. And then also those indexes, those indices that I don't know how to say that, index or indice, but either way, um, the things that we measure, and in particular with spring emergence, it really does have to do with certain plants across the country, but then also just recognizing that we can, if we stay in place for long enough, we each individually can track whatever plant or animal we want across the years. So I'll show you a little bit more about that as we go. So there's the continental scale, and then we can zoom in a little bit at the bioregional scale. So that's like here in Montana, we're in Missoula. We live in Missoula Valley. It's a valley that's connected by about 4 or 5 other valleys, and so that defines our bioregion. And that has a particular climate associated with it and particular weather patterns based on its orientation to the rest of the continent, its elevation, that kind of thing. So we can look at weather trends. We can consider the migration effects of climate change, certainly, and what mismatches occur when the climate changes and all the species in a connected ecosystem try to catch up to that. What kind of timing mismatches happen there? And just like to throw it out there, I'm going to show you some data about this. So this is just like a level set question. Do you think in this region, Missoula, Montana, spring is coming earlier in general or later in general due to climate change?
Earlier.
Earlier.
Earlier, okay, yeah, yeah, cool, cool, cool. Relatively intuitive. If I were to ask you that question though, and we were in Tennessee, um, you might still say earlier, but the answer, the data, is actually showing that spring is coming later in Tennessee right now. So I'll show you some maps about that in a minute. But that's where like the bioregion really matters. It's not just a blanket climate's changing, everything's getting warmer. It really is, it really varies based on your region. And then at an individual scale, I've got some cool observation tools to introduce to you all if you're interested. And I want to show you my own project with this particular service berry. So we'll look at that. And then even diving deeper than the individual scale at the intrapersonal scale, which is how you understand yourself. This is the stuff that I really like to get into as an environmental educator. But what phenophases do you experience, and how do you navigate that annual cycle, and what animal life cycle stages do you undergo? So we'll talk about that at the very end. Okay, starting big though. Here's from climate.gov, and I was looking at their data and I couldn't help but notice the disclaimer at the top of their website. So I screenshotted it and I decided to put it up here as well. So climate.gov is not staying up to date, and the resource that I accessed paused in June of 2025. And that is our government deciding that this resource is not going to be kept up to date. So just to say that that's where this data comes from, and that's what is shown on the website. But it is interesting data and it is still relevant. And this goes back to that lilac index that I was talking about. So this is actually NOAA, which is the agency that runs climate.gov. Um, NOAA reporting on the work of National Phenology Network. So it goes back to the lilac index. But here again is this tracking of first leaf, and a slightly different look at it. But nationwide, we can see that this is basically showing, is spring coming earlier or is spring coming later based on an average, right? So first we have to take all the data we have for all of the years and average it out and say that's zero. Okay, now this year, based on zero, where are we, right? Are we either earlier for the leaf out that we're seeing than average or later than average for the leaf out? And I find this map just fascinating. I could look at this and zoom in on this for hours. Because again, I see a very heterogeneous effect across the country, across the lower 48. And things to note are that there are places that are at average, right? It's not that spring is being driven earlier in every single place. There are places that are right at average, including down in Texas and some of those far southeast states. There are also places where leaf out is being pushed later into the year, which means spring is coming later, which means we have longer, colder, wetter winters in certain areas. And time and again, as you look at these graphs, or as I look at these graphs, it's that band across the upper southeast that is really, really distinctive here in terms of how climate change is driving spring in our country. We see that it's actually coming quite a bit later in those states and those areas. Um, and I don't know if you all have paid attention to the weather news on this, but that's often where we're seeing those like freak snowstorms or ice storms. We certainly saw some of that this last winter, was in those same areas, right? So um, I wish I could tell you exactly what's driving that. I think a meteorologist probably could. But it means something for our ecosystems too, of course. Meanwhile, up in the Northwest and in the Rocky Mountain West, we do see that generally speaking, we are experiencing earlier and earlier spring. And that can be quantified to roughly between 0 and 21 days. So we're looking at the majority of a month that we are being pushed into an earlier spring relative to about a 100-year data set. And that's real. And that's, I mean, those are the conversations that we have about these early warm days, that it seems to be coming earlier and earlier, and the data shows that that's true. One point here. So the leaf out. And I had to learn this for myself as I started to learn about this whole subject, just like the anatomy and the physiology of plants. But generally, leaves come first, and then flowers come. So, and so right now we're focused on like woody shrubby trees. So they're kind of in the middle between shrubs and trees. Sometimes they take shrub form, sometimes they take tree form, but that's going to be the class of lilacs that we've talked about, also that Pacific dogwood, and also the serviceberry that we'll finish with. Those are all in that sort of shrubby tree category where they're deciduous plants, meaning they grow new leaves every year and then drop them in the fall. And yes, they put out their leaves first, and then shortly thereafter, they put out flowers. And what we're seeing is that actually the leaf dates are generally arriving earlier, but the bloom dates are actually timed a little bit differently. And I'll pause here and again ask the question, or just kind of like maybe we can come up with a couple different ideas here. We know that a lot of these changes are driven by temperature. But thinking from a plant's perspective, if I'm a woody tree like a lilac or like a serviceberry, am I going to be responding solely to temperature in terms of my timing for leafing out or flowering? And the answer is no. And there are other factors here, right? So temperature is going to be one. Does anybody have like an idea for what another factor might be? Yeah, just like again, I'm the serviceberry. What drives or what drives that that timing for me to make the decision to leaf out or to leaf out based on these factors? What are those factors?
Christina says daylight/day length.
Cool. Photoperiod is a big one. And what's cool about photoperiod is that it doesn't change year to year unless somehow our planetary orbit changes. We're going to have the same photoperiod roughly for the next million years. So if I'm a plant and I'm concerned with like consistency, then yeah, it might make sense to time my emergent behavior on photoperiod. And that's certainly true. And it might be true for flowers where it's not true for leaves, right? It may be that leaves come out based on temperature and flowers come out based on photoperiod. Could be. There is at least one other factor that I'm familiar with based on this literature to mention. I don't know if it's on anybody's mind or if any other factors are on others' minds.
Possibly at least for bloom. Does it have anything to do with like pollinators and when they are out and about?
Whoa. I hope so. There's some really interesting new research about the way plants can communicate. I mean, plant communication is very much like a growing field. But measuring plants' ability to hear, so basically to respond to sound, is starting to become like a field of study. And yeah, so like, can plants hear the buzzing of a bee? Maybe actually yes, in some ways. And so can they respond to that? Potentially, yeah. I can't say anything for sure about that, Mari, but it's science that's happening right now. The factor that I am thinking of is actually cooling days. So another way that plants respond to, or that plants time their spring emergence is based on how many days of cooling under a certain threshold temperature have occurred. And I find that to be a kind of an interesting, kind of scary factor because we are losing our cooling days in our winters. And we just experienced a very weird winter that was really warm. And so basically, you have this period of senescence, this dormancy that plants to some degree need in order to then restart that annual cycle. And that can be quantified in terms of cooling days. Um, but that may be changing along with climate change. So I think the jury's out on what that'll do. I'll move on, but just some cool, yeah, again, some continent scale discussion here. This is kind of a scary graphic, and I just no words are really required to understand this. But what you have here is again a normalized average based on 30 years across 100. So you take 100 years and you average you find your 30-year average in those hundreds, and then you um, figure out for each 30-year period, your difference from that average. And so from 1901 through 2020, this is the trend across our country. And I guess I'll just remind, or just to say explicitly here, that phenology is climate science. It is not necessarily big data earth science in all ways. It's much more observational than that, but it it shows us climate change in a very real way. And this is earth science. So what we're looking at here is temperature, um, but but pretty important to know and acknowledge, I think. So in this context, let's zoom in a little bit closer to our region in Montana. Um, and so this is back to that daily leaf anomaly. So not temperature, but in terms of leaf emergence, are we early or are we late? And zooming into our region, we can see that generally speaking, Montana is experiencing earlier springs, about 20 days earlier. Um, Notice, though, that this leaf anomaly is really driven by elevation. And Missoula, the word Missoula in this map is covered by one of these anomalies. But maybe you can see it's kind of like, well, if you see the word Montana and go directly left of Montana, you'll pass Helena and then you'll hit Missoula. Um, and you'll see the Missoula Valley is colored in there, as well as the Bitterroot Valley, which is that straight north-south strip there. And all of that is showing that in the valleys, we are experiencing earlier springs based on that leaf out index. In the mountains, it might be a different story. It looks from this map like in the mountains, which I'll show you in a second. I've overlaid an elevational map here. But we're going to see that actually we're right around average in the higher elevations in Montana. Um, and it's true that elevation correlates to temperature in a lot of ways. But there are other factors there as well, right? The ecosystems change when you go up in elevation. So the species, the mix of species is different. You have mountain weather that you get in the mountains that you don't get in the valleys. So all sorts of things are different about those montane habitats, but temperature, which is one of the big drivers, that's one of them. And we can just think as we see this, as we think about, okay, what does an earlier spring mean? Does that just mean that we get more nice weather? Yes, it does actually. But what does it mean for our migratory birds and our pollinators and our resident wildlife? It's going to mean a lot of different things, and I wish I could present to you all the science in a very bite-sized piece right now, but there's a lot of science that describes this, and just a couple of factors that came to my awareness as I was preparing was, so I'm a migratory bird and I need food as I go north. And if the food that I'm used to having isn't there this year, then that's going to be a problem for me. And I might find that my food availability is diminished or changed in a certain way. Also, habitat. If I'm a migratory bird and I show up to a region where I expect there to be leaves on the trees to hide me for nesting, and there are no leaves on the trees, that might be a problem. Or vice versa. If I navigate by, clear sight lines because there are no leaves on the trees, and I show up and there are leaves on the trees, and I'm not used to that, I might be confused and I might have a hard time navigating through that. So there's all sorts of effects, these trickle-down effects that can happen as we see that our season progresses earlier. Um, and yes, we also get to enjoy nice weather for a while longer. Although our ski season is being pushed into smaller and smaller segments. Here's your elevational overlay. So there is the in this overlay, the hotter the color, the higher the elevation. And so that's just to show that, in fact, yes, the the leaf anomaly is really mostly in the valleys, and the average temperatures and the more average leaf out timing is happening in the higher elevation. Questions, thoughts, ideas? We'll keep moving. Chime in. Here's a graph. It is a graph of Missoula. It is a graph of that same Well, no, I'm sorry. It's a springtime anomaly that is more temperature based. So this is accumulated growing degree days, and I cannot claim to understand exactly what the AGDD metric is, but I believe it's like the number of measurements above your average across the year. So right now, today, well, no, this is based on yesterday's data. So April 20th was DOI is day of year 110. So we were at 110 days for the year. And in that, we had this year 723 growing degree days, um, as compared to last year of 618 growing degree days, and as compared to the 30-year average of 437. So basically, this is showing an anomaly with a 32-degree Fahrenheit base temperature, to say that, yeah, every year we're climbing that graph a little bit more. And if it feels warmer than it did last year, that's because it is, and it has been since January. Um, and we are not only warmer than we were last year, but we're warmer than the average. And that's in Missoula specifically. Okay, enough with the graphs. We're now zooming into we're going to zoom into the individual scale. So we're going to go to the National Phenology Network and look a little bit at Nature's Notebook. And I wish if this were 2017, I would have a much better presentation about Nature's Notebook because that's when I was in practice of using it. But if you are interested in making phenological observations and contributing them to a national database that uses that data for visualizations like we've been seeing, this is your pathway, Nature's Notebook. So what you can do with Nature's Notebook is you can document backyard observations, and it doesn't have to be in your backyard, but it can be very local. It can be single individual plants or more like blanket observations of your neighborhood, or I should say opportunistic observations. If you happen to see a skunk or a porcupine in your neighborhood and you want to make that observation through the phenological lens, you can do that. Or at the same time, if you love a tree in your neighborhood, which is where we're going to go with this, then you can watch that tree blossom forth and document those changes and submit them to Nature's Notebook. So this is a great way to start a nature journaling practice, because the best way to do this is to, yes, take the pictures and yes, submit the data, but also have your own notebook and write down your observations and keep those for the years. And you can go back then and see last year's observation, 5 years ago observations, and when did this happen 5 years ago? I have a friend, she's actually my banjo teacher, who is also a total phenology nerd, and she has 6 years of records. And she said that this year, the buttercups, which are some of the first flowers to emerge in the spring, the buttercups showed up 17 days earlier than she had ever recorded in the past. And I think it was in February that the first one she recorded was this year. So that's good indicator. Um, Other things to do, just to mention, in case anyone's looking for ways to act in these directions, I really recommend and love getting involved in the Parks and Recreation Division of the City of Missoula, or if you're not in Missoula, wherever you may be, get involved with stewardship actions. So around here, it's really easy to sign up to volunteer to do trail work, or weed work, right? So a lot of it is weed mitigation because weeds have a negative impact on our local ecosystems, or it might be native plant planting and propagation. But that's just like, it's a really nice way to give back and to start practicing reciprocity. And it has something to do with phenology because when we weed, we weed certain plants at certain times, because of their phenophases, right? And sometimes, we have to wait until they're available, and then it's good to weed them before they seed out and drop or disperse their seeds, right? So things like that, really good to do. And then just generally educate yourself and act within your zone of influence. That's my plug for being an activist right there. Um, Conservation activist. Doesn't, we have these global issues, but we can act at the local level in a good way. So Nature's Notebook is a great resource for that. I'll show you. Oh, okay. So we're going to get into the plant now, the actual plant. So if you're in Missoula, especially if you work in the Swift building, you might know this plant. It's in the Clark Fork Native Prairie site, which is right outside of our office building here at EPI, and it's right next to the Clark Fork River Trail. The bridge in the background is the Bear Tracks Bridge or the Higgins Bridge. And this serviceberry, which is sort of spilling off over the trail there, is our tree of inquiry. So we're going to watch this through its spring emergence here in a minute. But first, we got to get to know about serviceberry generally. So this is just a quick slide. Whew, a little bit more data. I think this is the last map I'm going to show you. This is the serviceberry's range. The purple is its native range. It is all across Montana. And then the more colorful bits are a computer model of habitat suitability. So the hotter the color, the more suitable the habitat. And that's just to show that in Western Montana, serviceberry is really, really common and the habitat's really good. And as you go east, a little less good, but it's still in range. And of course, we in Missoula are central to its optimal range. And then just a little bit of facts about that. The particular variety of serviceberry that we mostly see here in Western Montana is Amelenchier alnifolia, also known as Saskatoon serviceberry. And so a couple pictorial examples of the full plant there. So we'll take this plant, and then we need to know what we're observing. And National Phenology Network has a great resource. This is one of many resources that they've published. They've got just incredible resources on their website. But this is like a 200-page document describing phenophases of flowering plants. And it goes through all the different types of flowering plants, from tiny little forbs to massive trees. And we're going to focus in again on the type of plant that serviceberry is. And we're going to see that their resources give us these phenophases. So these are basically our available life cycle events that we can potentially observe across the year, from breaking leaf buds to observable leaves, even increasing leaf size. And we'll see this actually in my photo series here. And actually, well, no, that's not where it stops. So we keep going with leaves, and then we start to get colored leaves later in the season, falling leaves later in the season, and then there's the flowers. So we have flowers or flower buds present, open flowers, pollen release. They actually only track pollen release with allergy-producing plants. And then fruits. Are there fruits present? Are there ripe fruits? And then is there fruit drop? And you see those same phenophases here on the right, plotted out in the year, from the leaves to the flowers to the fruits. Although that's interesting, I'm seeing that in this map, flowers come first, which can also happen. But in my serviceberry, the leaves came first. So let's take a look. Okay, one way we can do this is across years. And so here is bud burst on, this is the same plant. This is that plant that I showed you a picture of, across 3 different years from 2024 through 2026. And it's not the exact same day, but it's close. It's within a week. And there are very minute differences across these 3 years. So isn't that interesting? I was just showing you some graphs that showed you how wildly different 2026 is from 2025 and how we are progressing toward a earlier spring every single year. And yet here's our serviceberry with its bud burst roughly the same time each year. So again, some of those factors might not be just temperature. So we can do across years, but we can also watch across a single season. And so I've got just a series of photographs here progressing from March 17th which was my observed date of bud burst for this particular plant. And then we get the more obvious bud burst, March 23rd, March 27th. Ah, okay. Leaf emergence on March 27th. Growing leaf size now. Each time we observe, we're going to see, yes, growing leaf size. Cool. Into April, April 1st, April 4th. Now we get those bigger leaves, still growing leaf size. I finally found the single twig that I liked to observe, so we're going to see the same twig now. April 6th and April 7th, what do we see here but the flower buds coming out? So you see we had the leaves, they're still growing leaf size, and now the flower buds. April 7th, the single open flower there on the left side of the right photo. So we've got yeah, open flowers there. And then April 8th and April 9th, full flower. Actually, no, I think most of those buds are still closed or just opening up. And then here we're in full flower. Great. April 14th and 15th. So that was just a few days ago. Really lovely, lovely blooms. But boy, are they temporary. So April 15th, April 17th, full flower. And then by yesterday, April 20th, flowering's done. Just 5 days of flowering. That's it. That's all we get, at least for that tree, right? Go find this is a tree again in a really good optimal site for flowering. So this is one of the earlier ones. So you can go find a tree in a less optimal site and catch it on its earlier cycle. But here in this April 20th, we're starting to see fruits. They're not there yet, but you can see where they're going to be, where those flowers are wilting away. I'm almost done. I know
Can I ask a quick question, Joe?
yeah.
Is there is there a benefit or is there a benefit to having a shorter or longer flowering period, or does it just totally depend on the plant or the tree, how long it flowers and why it flowers for that period?
Yeah, good question. It's it's very likely going to be determined by its pollinators, right? So, however, whatever mechanism it gets pollinated by, and then also, um, yeah, what their timing is, if they're insect pollinators, I guess. And I think that serviceberry likely is insect pollinated, but it probably is wind pollinated to some degree too. So. If you're wind pollinated, you probably need a shorter flowering window because you don't need to attract insects for so long. Um, it's a good question, Gabri. Yeah. I don't know entirely. I will say though, it looks to me like here on April 21st, these flowers can probably still be pollinated. You know, you see those anthers still up. So it might still be releasing pollen even as the petals die back. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are there any I don't know a lot about phenology or plants in general, but are there flowering plants that happen like later in the season, like into the summer, or is it namely during the spring that that's happening?
No, I mean, it's great. And I encourage you to just lean into these observations because there are, yeah, species will go through waves of flowering from now until August. And it really is species dependent and they each have their own timing. And one of the many common names for serviceberry is Juneberry. And so serviceberry is one of the first to flower and first to fruit. And so on a good year, you can, and this was last year was a good year, you can harvest a serviceberry and eat it in June, which is crazy to have a summer berry ready to go, you know? Meanwhile, the choke cherries are going to be a little later in flowering and also fruiting. So, you know, just as one example, but look for the forbs, which are like your ground growing wildflowers. Those have all sorts of different timings, and even some will only start flowering in August and maybe even September. I don't know. But here you go, less than a month. You go from this nice little bud burst to you're done flowering, and it looks to me like those are full-sized leaves also. So leaf size is not increasing anymore too. Um, cool. Okay. Do we have 5 minutes left? Is that right? All right. If there are questions, please fire them at me. I do want to get through this little activity in 5 minutes, though, if we can. So this now goes to, we were at the backyard, sort of personal level. This is now going into the intrapersonal level, which is our own experiences with phenology. And like I said, you just need a piece of paper and a pen here and go along with me here. So this is one way to track phenology. You can use this tool to track the phenology around you, but you can also use it for yourself. Um, and what I encourage you to do, I invite you to draw along. So what you need here is a donut shape of a circle. So you do one inner circle, one outer circle, and then one really small ring outside of that. Doesn't have to be perfect, none of it. Okay. And then once, yeah, it can be as imperfect as it needs to be. Once you have that, go ahead and just bisect bisect that circle, that donut ring twice so that you have 4 quadrants in this way. Pretty simple. Okay. And what we're creating here is a phenology wheel. And this is a resource that an organization that doesn't exist anymore, Partners in Place, created. And I loved them when I was in grad school. And I kept their materials. They're great. Okay, so now that we have 4 quadrants, we can populate our wheel with the seasons. And so now we have winter at the top, spring on the right, and you see where it goes, summer down below, and fall on the left. And if you would like, I'm not going to do this right now, but you can add in the months, and you'll even notice there that you've got the equinoxes and the solstices marked. If you're really into astrology, there's all sorts of things to put on here. The Celtic culture has at least 8 seasonal indicators. So we've got 4 marked here, 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes. In between each of those is another one for that balance point. So you can mark those. Now that you've marked those, you can start to fill in the gaps. And this is where you can attend to your personal phenology and your phenophases. So we were just describing a surface berry and the bud burst and the leaf emergence and the flowering. What about you? Like, what do you do uh, through the year that's seasonally driven, right? And maybe for some of us, especially here in Missoula, it has to do with the outdoor activities that we might enjoy, right? As those change. So maybe within this ring, that's one way to start, is to just start to document what activities you enjoy and when those start and when they end. Because eventually, like, you're not going to do them all year, right? So for me, outdoor picnicking is one that I haven't started yet, but maybe in May, my picnic season picks up through the summer. And now I want to hear from somebody else. What would you put on this wheel? Picnic. Everybody's engrossed in writing. That's perfect.
Something that I do in like fall specifically is listen to like one album like without fail. I on repeat in the fall and then the rest of the year I'm fine.
Yes. Wait, is it the same album every year or it's oh okay.
hmm Yep.
Cool. Love it.
Christina says she eats differently, has different wake and sleep cycles, and wears different clothes, as well as doing different outdoor things.
Great. Yeah, we can track our phenology of our fashion or our outfits. Absolutely. that sleep and waking cycle is real. And the food, I mean, food is central. And actually, I've seen a lot of this work done in indigenous cultures across the Northwest, at least, in Salish cultures and others. And they will often start with food, right? It's all about food. And so what changes in our food and in our diet through that yearly round? Cool. So this is a tool that some people will make beautiful pieces of art out of their phenology wheels. You are welcome to do that. You're also welcome to mess it up and play around with it and make multiple. There's also different layers we can add to this. So the annual cycle is one, but what would be another cycle that we could add to, or like, let's say we take out the seasons, what would be another cycle that we could track in a wheel like this?
Let's see here. So Christina said daily or monthly cycles, potentially.
Totally. Yeah, there we go. This is where it kind of gets into the metaphorical space, but also like, yeah, there are different time cycles. So we could track a day through this wheel. Um,
We do like
oh,
moon cycles. Oh,
sure. Yeah. The moon, actually, this organization had a moon cycle wheel. They also have a life cycle wheel, right? So here you have the full cycle of a human life tracked out in a wheel in seasons, as it were, right?
right as you
Um,
put that up, Joe, Christina said life cycle. So
oh, cool.
you
That's
guys are on
great.
the same page.
Yeah, yeah, and here's your daily cycle. Absolutely. So for me personally, and this is how I'll end this, just to say that phenology is a great study. It's a good way to understand climate change, sure, but for me, it's very personal and it's just a great way to relate to the world around me and to nature, and also myself through these cycles and what can become a metaphor of knowing myself a little bit better. So hopefully that was fun and we got into it a little bit, and I think. That's all I've got.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much. That was super fun. I've never done one of those little phonology wheels, so that was great.
Yeah,
Christina
thanks.
says thank you. That was super fun. I know we're definitely just a little over time here, but I'll open the space if anyone has any lingering questions. You can feel free to pop them in the chat or else open your mic if you want. So I'll just give us a second here for that.
I guess I had a quick question, Joe. Do you have any sites that you can recommend to see examples of some of the cycles that people have created, perhaps with some of the additional symbolism or whatnot? I'd love to
Oh,
see some
interesting.
real products.
Yeah. Hmm. One, I think, so are you here in Missoula, Christina?
No, I'm in California,
Oh, okay. Okay.
but I
So
come through there oftentimes.
sure, sure. I mean, the local example that I think of is what we call Waterworks Hill, which is a really heavily human used space. But it's used differently throughout the year. So you can, it's just like it's a trailhead, but it's also there's a peace park there and there's a mindfulness walk. And so, I think I don't know if this is answering your question or not, but if I go to Waterworks Hill every week, say once a week throughout the year, I'm going to see that that season changing all around me in human behavior and in human activity, but also in the plants that grow there and how it's a grassland area, but there's a lot of flowers and the flowers come out at different times. And then also that space is built such that I can go and be mindful about my life and maybe do some reflection and maybe work on my own phenology wheel in that space or practice some of like have a picnic, right? Do my seasonal activity. So um, maybe that's one answer to your question. And then I My mind is blanking beyond the National Phenology Network, which is, I still think, a really wonderful resource. They're based down in Tucson, Arizona, and they're attached to the University of Arizona, but they're a nationwide network. And so I do recommend being involved with them. And then I suppose the other thing is there's a lot of like iNaturalist and those other citizen science databases. I know Cornell does the Bird Lab as well. But when I was in grad school, we learned it as citizen science. Now it's participatory science, because yeah, it's right to not exclude non-citizens from this practice, but really it's a way for anybody to participate in real science. So yeah, things like iNaturalist, Nature's Notebook through the Phenology Network. Um, and then I think at the local and regional level, there's going to be just a ton more ways to plug into that too, right? That's that kind of like plugging into Parks and Rec level activity. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, cool. I think we can end it here then, and I'll just give a quick plug for our next presentation. Our next webinar is going to be June 2nd from 5:30 to 6:30. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is going to be presenting on their AmeriCorps program, and how to start a career in conservation. So this is going to be an awesome presentation for anyone interested in kind of the job side of working in the conservation industry. And for more information on their presentation, you can scan that little QR code. But otherwise, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Joe. This was an awesome presentation, and we really hope to see you guys at the next one.
Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks,
Take
Joe.
care.
Thanks, everyone.